President Zelenskyy maintained security guarantees are crucial to any deal with America on ending the war with Russia. He was center stage at a summit of European leaders in London after that public row with Donald Trump.
We are at a crossroads in history today. This is not a moment for more talk. It's time to act, time to step up and lead, and to unite around a new plan for a just and enduring peace.
Tonight, President Zelenskyy told journalists he was still willing to sign the minerals deal with America.
All that we want from partners is the constructive dialogue.
І щоб вони пам'ятали, хто агресор.
So that they remember who the aggressor is.
And later, there was a private audience with King Charles at Sandringham. Well, what does Russia think of all this? We'll be live in Moscow also tonight. Israel stops the flow of aid and supplies into Gaza as it demands Hamas agrees to ceasefire extension plans. And glamour on the red carpet as Hollywood gears up for its big night at the Oscars. Hello there. There was much riding on this summit of European leaders in London, how best to forge a path to peace in the war with Russia after the meltdown of relations between Ukraine and the US. Well, now President Zelenskyy, after those talks, says he is still willing to sign a minerals deal with America, but security guarantees are still necessary. Sir Keir Starmer, hosting the summit, said any peace deal must respect Ukraine's sovereignty, and at the heart of any agreement must be the United States. After the meeting, President Zelenskyy flew to Sandringham to meet the king, with the two men spending just under an hour together. Well, what do Russians think of all this? We'll be live in Moscow. But first, Chris Mason has our top story.
Early spring sunshine in central London. A few hundred yards from Buckingham Palace, this mansion on the Mall, Lancaster House. This is what the leaders here wanted today to be about, securing our future. The hour is Europe and Canada, and the host, Sir Keir Starmer, who told the BBC this morning that he wants to bring together those countries like the UK, keen to act quickly and do the most.
We need to be clear what a European security guarantee would look like. I do acknowledge that that's more likely to be in the first instance, a coalition of the willing. In other words, we've got to find those countries in Europe that are prepared to be a bit more forward-leaning.
And after Friday night's spat in the White House...
Mr. President, can you get things back on track today?
The Prime Minister is working with the French President Emmanuel Macron on a plan to stop the fighting and then discuss it with the United States.
Will Donald Trump ever be a reliable partner, sir? Can you come together and come up with a plan?
And the cast list complete with the arrival of President Zelenskyy of Ukraine.
Would you be willing to apologise to Donald Trump, Mr. President?
A leader with plenty to talk about outside and in. The Prime Minister and 18 others trying to pull off a balancing act, keeping America on side and putting an arm around Ukraine. Both matter, Sir Keir insists, for our safety as well as Kyiv's.
We're gathered here today because this is a once-in-a-generation moment for the security of Europe.
For around 2 hours they talked, and then some of them talked to us. The President of the European Commission saying EU countries will need to increase defence spending massively. Why? Listen to the memorable imagery she chose.
It's basically turning Ukraine into a steeled porcupine that is indigestible for potential invaders. And therefore the focus is not only on the military supply, but also, for example, securing the energy system and making sure that over time this is a strong and resilient country.
Have you won the argument with European colleagues about stepping up to the plate in terms
Absolutely.
of money?
We all have understood that after a long time of underinvestment, it is now of utmost importance to step up the defence investment for a prolonged period of time.
And what of the North Atlantic Defence Alliance, NATO, America for so long at its heart, but now with an unpredictable president?
I think it was a good meeting. It was a very good meeting because what you see is European countries stepping up. First of all, to make sure that Ukraine has got what it needs to stay in the fight as long as it has to continue. What we also see is European countries really ramping up to help with security guarantees for the moment when a peace deal would be struck. Obviously, there is no deal yet. There is no ceasefire yet. But we have to prepare for that moment.
The Prime Minister told us those countries up for getting involved in delivering and maintaining peace in Ukraine are now working up their plans.
Those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing.
And he added,
today I'm announcing a new deal which allows Ukraine to use £1.6 billion of UK export finance to buy more than 5,000 air defence missiles, which will be made in Belfast, creating jobs in our brilliant defence sector.
After what happened the other night between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy, do you feel a greater personal responsibility alongside President Macron and others for delivering a workable peace? And on the coalition of the willing, as you've described it today, are you persuading more people to join it? Thank you.
On the question of responsibility, I do think the United Kingdom should step up and lead. We have done that historically as a nation, and we need to do it again. On the coalition of the willing, yes, a number of countries have indicated today that they want to be part of the plan that we are developing. I'll leave them to make their own statements about exactly how they want to make that contribution.
So a number of countries, he says, but we don't know how many. Earlier, Westminster's biggest opposition parties gave us their take on these fast-moving events, the Conservatives focusing on defence spending.
This is a fundamental question. When I was in Cabinet, we talked about getting to 3% by 2030, and we couldn't make the numbers work. We need to find a way to make the numbers work because the world is changing very quickly. And with things like defence, you can't make a decision at the last minute.
Liberal Democrats have been arguing for some time about the need to work with our European neighbours more closely, whether it's on our economy or on our security. And I think recent developments have shown that that is absolutely the way to go.
For Ukraine's leader after the summit, another appointment. Tonight, a moment Donald Trump craves, but Volodymyr Zelenskyy seeing him already. He flew to Sandringham in Norfolk, meeting the king. Ukraine's future, a continent's future. Today, a big day among many big days. Europe in an era of war and Donald Trump. Chris Mason, BBC News at Lancaster House.
Well, following his meeting with King Charles, President Zelenskyy sat down with journalists before returning to Kiev, and he was asked whether he'd apologised to Donald Trump for the public row at the White House on Friday. Laura Kunsberg was at that briefing with the Ukrainian leader.
He's resisted Russia's attacks for 3 long, bitter years of war. On Friday, he fought off the American president's barbs too. But after 2 days of turmoil tonight, speaking in his own language, President Zelenskyy wanted to make sure he was understood.
I traveled in the train for 12 hours, then for 11 hours. I flew because the President of the United States invited me.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
But after Friday's fevered meeting, how can he make peace with President Trump, if that's what's required, in order to bring the real war to an end?
Surely to get the security guarantee that you crave, you do need to rebuild your relationship with President Trump. Will you, as the White House is still asking you to do, apologise or express any regret for how you handled the meeting?
All that we want from partners is the constructive dialogue, so that they remember who the aggressor is.
Are you willing in principle to talk about conceding territory, in principle to express some regret to President Trump, or to sign the minerals deal?
Ми конструктивні. Якщо ми домовилися, що вона буде підписана,
We are constructive. If we agreed upon signing it, we were ready to sign it. And honestly, I believe that the United States would be ready as well. Perhaps there is a need in time to analyze certain things, but I would just want Ukrainian position to be heard.
Too early to talk concessions, he told us. Our freedom, our values are not for sale. But he welcomed proposals from the UK, France and others to offer European troops to guard a potential peace one day. Yet the warmth of a British welcome and European promises are not the same as the raw power of American backing. President Zelenskyy wants all three to bring the agony of his people to an end. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Stansted.
We're going to go to Russia. Steve Rosenberg is live in Moscow for us now. Lots happening in Europe on all of this, Steve. What's been the reaction from where you are?
Well, tonight on social media, Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, someone considered to be close to Vladimir Putin, posted this about the London summit. He called it an anti-Trump, anti-Russian coven. In other words, like a gathering of witches, and said that those people who'd taken part wanted the war to continue. Now, what's interesting about that, I think, is the phrase anti-Trump. The Russian government newspaper used the same phrase, anti-Trump, on its website tonight in its reporting. And I think it's clear that after today, Moscow's message to the White House will be, dear President Trump, the Europeans are against you, they're against Russia, and they're against peace. We know what the Russians are against. That is the idea of having European peacekeepers in Ukraine, because Russian officials have made that point several times over the last few weeks. And again today, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, in an interview said that the plan for peacekeepers in Ukraine is a continuation of attempts to egg on the Kiev regime to fight a war against Russia. And Russian state television tonight poured scorn on the idea of European peacekeepers. It said that you could fill Wembley Stadium with the British Army and still have room for some of the French Army.
All right. Steve, thank you. Steve Rosenberg there live in Moscow. Chris and Jeremy are here with me. To you, Chris, first. What a pickle the Prime Minister was in, having to walk that fine line between keeping Donald Trump on side and continuing support for President Zelenskyy. Has he fallen off that tightrope?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because there's Russia, Moscow, picking away at that exact vulnerability, that sense of a divided West. What was striking today was that there was a warmth, there was a feeling of camaraderie, I guess in contrast with what we saw in the White House 48 hours ago, but also the soundtrack of a continent collectively thinking that things have got real, that Europe needs to try and re-prop up this plan for peace, but also a recognition again, Clive, from the Prime Minister that Europe will need America. So he's trying to maintain that balance. Domestically, and this might sound parochial in the context of an international conversation, lots of support here in the UK across politics for what the Prime Minister is trying to achieve. He's had a bumpy start domestically in many senses, Keir Starmer, but he has seized this crisis and he is shaping events alongside others. And of course, big implications of what he's talking about if a deal can be done, talking about soldiers and British airmen and women being involved in keeping the peace. There's loads more diplomacy to come. This balancing act will continue. I think we'll see the Prime Minister on the road again, trying to maintain that balancing act in the coming weeks, and clearly still a huge amount unresolved.
Sure. Jeremy, Sir Keir Starmer talking about a coalition of the willing, rumours tonight as well of calls for a one-month ceasefire. This is being reported by Le Monde in France as coming from the French. How would you assess where we are in terms of trying to map out some kind of way forward in reaching some kind of ceasefire or peace deal?
Well, I think first of all, President Zelenskyy will feel a lot happier going home after this meeting in London than he would have had he taken the direct route from Washington, D.C., because he will have all that support ringing in his ears and the possibility it might turn from good wishes into hard, tangible support for Ukraine, because at the same time in America, the same messages are coming out, the same kind of things he was hearing there, that he needs to compromise, he might even need to resign, that sort of thing, and positive stuff going towards Moscow from them too. Reported in the New York Times that the Defense Secretary Hegseth has ordered US Cyber Command to cease offensive cyber operations against the Russians. So another thing the Russians might like, while pressure on Ukraine continues. Now, why is this such a hard thing for Keir Starmer and the others to get to a deal? Well, it's about a lot more than real estate, whatever Mr. Trump might think. It's not a question of how much Putin gets to keep and how much Zelenskyy has to give up. For the Ukrainians, it's about sovereignty, it's about independence, it's about being their own boss and not being back under the control of Moscow. But for Putin, now Putin has said often that he doesn't believe that there is such an independent entity as a Ukraine or a Ukrainian. And maybe his attitude is echoing a well-known phrase saying by Mr. Brzezinski, who was a former American national security advisor. He said, without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be an empire. And he was saying this when the USSR was falling. But with Ukraine suborned and subordinated, Russia automatically becomes an empire. So, in other words, for Putin, it's about his place in the world. So a one-month ceasefire against that, well, it doesn't sound that attractive.
All right. Jeremy Bowen, international editor, Chris Mason, political editor. Many thanks. On to other news now. And Israel has stopped all humanitarian aid entering Gaza. Why? Well, Benjamin Netanyahu's office says it's because Hamas has refused to accept an American proposal to extend the first phase of the ceasefire, which expired yesterday. Hamas says blocking aid is cheap blackmail. Lucy Williamson has the latest from Jerusalem.
At Gaza's border today, new demands and old tactics. Stopping aid, Israel's way of starting talks on new Israeli terms. Its Prime Minister wants half the hostages left in Gaza released before talks on ending the war can begin. Hamas said it was a violation of the deal they'd agreed.
There will be no free lunches. If Hamas thinks that it will be possible to continue the ceasefire without us accepting hostages, it is very mistaken.
Aid has been flowing into Gaza over the past 6 weeks. Many Gazans now less worried about Israel's willingness to stop the trucks than its reluctance to stop the war.
The people are worried that the war might return and that we will go back to the sorrows of war, expensive prices and death.
Everyone was hurt by this war. Their houses destroyed and people are now begging in the streets. So we tell Hamas to hand over the hostages so Israel gives us back our children from the Israeli prisons.
In Israel, the return of hostages like Sagi Dekel-Hen has increased pressure to extend the deal and get others home. Among them, 14 others from Sagi's kibbutz near Oz.
Israeli military leadership and our intelligence community has been saying that any incremental gains militarily in Gaza are not worth the lives of the hostages. The hostages must come home. And of course, that does mean at some level an ongoing ceasefire.
But Israel is signalling it's still ready for war, sending more tanks to Gaza's border and calling up reserves. Hamas says the price of freeing more hostages is ending the war. Some in Israel hope the threat of continuing it might also work. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Jerusalem.
A woman has been arrested after the death of a 4-year-old girl in a house fire in Manchester. She died in hospital following the blaze in the Rusholme area. The 44-year-old woman is being questioned on suspicion of arson with the intent to endanger life. Now, it's the Oscars tonight in Los Angeles with the race wide open for Best Film. The city is still recovering from last month's devastating wildfires, and the ceremony is expected to celebrate the emergency services as well as filmmakers. The musical Wicked is up for Best Picture alongside the papal thriller Conclave, while the exotic dancers from the cast of Anora are also getting ready to appear on the red carpet. Here's Emma Vardy.
It's an unusual awards season in LA, with many events cancelled since the wildfires. When it comes to the film industry's biggest prize, the show goes on.
I got a kid who wants someone.
Anora, the film about a lap dancer who marries a Russian oligarch, has emerged as one of the frontrunners for Best Picture.
Cash up front.
Deal.
The best part of this award show is that we're together.
How will you celebrate if you all win? How will you celebrate?
Like this.
You're making it our
business.
The film's been the subject of debate about the depiction of sex workers. Its director cast real dancers, and some of them, like Lindsay, will attend the ceremony.
There's going to be some real strippers at the Oscars. It's a foot in both worlds.
It's a duty I never thought I'd have to perform.
Ralph Fiennes is in contention for Best Actor in Conclave, which lifts the lid on the secretive process for choosing a new pope, and is also up for Best Picture.
An Oscar is one of the most recognisable awards there is, but a bit like choosing a new pope, voting for the Oscar winners is all pretty secretive as well. There are 10,000 professionals across the film industry who get to vote for the winners, so making it onto this red carpet is a big mark of respect from your movie-making peers.
How's my favourite pooch?
Wallace and Gromit, the much-loved British duo, are no strangers to Hollywood now and are back with their 6th Oscar nomination.
Driving around here in LA and Hollywood, you see big billboards with Wallace and Gromit up, and so, you know, they are getting the star treatment.
Filmmaking history is written at the Oscars, and without an out-and-out favourite for Best Picture this year, it's a night where anything can happen. Emma Vardy, BBC News, Los Angeles.
In football, the Edinburgh Derby got underway in stunning fashion. Hibernians scored inside 6 minutes before the hosts' Hearts then responded a mere 3 minutes later. But it was this long-range strike from Hibs defender Jack Iredale that decided the game, 2-1. The win keeps Hibs in 3rd place in the table. And Fulham have knocked Man United out of the FA Cup. They won 4-3 on penalties after drawing 1-1 at the end of extra time. They'll take on Crystal Palace in the quarter-finals. Here's Natalie Perks.
At St James's Park, Newcastle fans were dreaming of making a big step towards a second Wembley final this year. And when Minte's lunge was rightly punished, Alexander Isak continued his hot streak.
How about that for a confident penalty?
Brighton, though, found their rhythm at just the right time, with Minte making amends.
Brighton are level!
Both sides had chances to go on and win, but this moment of madness changed everything. Anthony Gordon's red mist means he's now banned for the Carabao Cup final. Remarkably, minutes later, Brighton were also down to 10, and Cher thought he'd scored Newcastle's last gasp winner. VAR said no. Extra time loomed, and this pulsating tie finally swung Brighton's way.
Slip through for Danny Welbeck! Brighton in front!
They've never won the FA Cup, but after a tie that had everything, the Seagulls are daring to dream. Things weren't quite as pulsating at Old Trafford. Manchester United went behind at home again, slow to react from a corner. But as the sun started setting on United's cup defence, they finally came to life with some clever control from their captain. With nothing to separate the sides, it came down to a shootout, and 2 missed penalties from Lindelof and Xerxes brought delight for Fulham, but heaped yet more despair on United amidst a season to forget. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
Time for the weather now, and here's Elizabeth. Hi there.
Hi, Clive. Well, it's another stunning end to the day. Of course, sunset in the west is now just after 6. Sunrise in the east is before 7. So the days are getting longer. The meteorological spring that started this weekend, it's been glorious. And yes, the sunshine is set to last into next week. It'll also stay mostly dry, away from the far northwest, where it will be wet and windy at times, and it will actually turn a little warmer later on through the week, but still some chilly nights towards the south, and that's certainly the case overnight tonight, because we'll keep the clear skies here, so temperatures will drop once again below freezing. Now, there has been a weather front just gradually tracking its way further southwards. It's fizzling out as it bumps into that high pressure towards the south, but quite a contrast in temperatures into tomorrow morning. Mild in the north, but freezing in further south, of course, and we'll also see some fog patches develop as we head through the morning. Most of that fog will tend to be across East Anglia into southeast England. It will lift and clear through the morning, and lots of sunshine around after that. Here's our old front. It's just stretching across northern England, Northern Ireland and North Wales. A few spots of drizzle, but some sunny spells behind the front across Scotland. Windy in the northwest, very windy in the Northern Isles, possibly some outbreaks of rain here, but lots of sunshine further south. That's where we'll see the best of it yet again. Now, as we head into Tuesday, it's just more of the same, but it's really quite windy across the northern half of the UK. We're going to be seeing some outbreaks of rain approach the Western Isles, northwest Scotland later on through the day. There will be some more mist and fog towards the south, but again, this is where we'll see the best of the sunshine. Notice the temperatures start to rise, and as the high pulls away later on through the week, we'll draw in a southerly wind, so temperatures are likely to rise even further. Now, you can check the forecast for your local area on the BBC Weather app, but here's the outlook for our capital cities. Clive.
Spring has sprung.
Yes.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's it. Now, let's join our colleagues for all the news where you are. Have a peaceful night.